like to speak about the impact of the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine outside of Ukraine. I will simultaneously focus on three issues. First, relations between various Orthodox churches. Second, at parish level. And third, I will, as I go along, try to answer an ecclesiological question. How does Eucharistic schism expand from episcopal synods to the faithful? And lastly, I will say a few things about the Orthodox-Catholic relations. But before I begin, please know I do not assign any blame to either Kiev, Moscow, or Constantinople unless I assign it to all of them. And that by investigating the consequences of autocephaly outside of Ukraine, I do not mean to make it a proxy war. A country that has such a venerable tradition and numerous Orthodox faithful is an honored member of the Orthodox body impacting the entire organism. So let's first see how Ukrainian autocephaly affected the relations between various Orthodox churches. The relations between Moscow and Constantinople worsened significantly in 2016 when Moscow refused to attend the Council of Greece and allegedly influenced three other churches to do the same. In 2018, within 5 weeks, Moscow and Constantinople went from full communion to schism. On September 7th, 2018, Constantinople appointed 2 exarchs to Kiev, one from here, if I understand correctly, which was a clear sign of Constantinople's intention to grant autocephaly and of its view that it has authority over Ukraine, despite Moscow's centuries-old jurisdiction over the same territory. In retaliation, on September 14th, the Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church decided to stop commemorating the Patriarch of Constantinople. Moreover, Moscow will withdraw its representatives from all episcopal assemblies and theological dialogues that were chaired by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. More on this later. On October 11th, the Synod of Constantinople confirmed its intention to grant autocephaly to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine by signing a Thomas later in January 2019. But in the meantime, in October 2018, the Moscow Patriarchate forbade all its members, clergy and laity, from receiving communion or other sacraments in churches under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. This decision sealed the schism between the two patriarchates and their faithful, but remained one-sided since Constantinople did not respond in kind. In Russia and in Eastern Europe, the schism affects mostly the hierarchy, but it appears that Moscow did not consider all implications for its faithful in other regions. First, Russian Orthodox faithful who live in territories under the Ecumenical Patriarchate do not have an alternative for receiving communion on a regular basis. More on that later. Second, many Russian Orthodox pilgrims visit Mount Athos, donating large amounts of money. Initially in 2018, the Moscow Patriarchate threatened with deposing Russian clergy and excommunicating Russian faithful who receive communion on Mount Athos. Clearly, the ones who were more restricted by this decision were paradoxically Russian faithful. Moscow's stated hope was that by stopping the flow of money from Russia to Athos, the Athonite monks would put pressure on the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Russia's favor. But at the end of December 2018, Russian laity and clergy received permission to commune on Mount Athos only at the St. Panteleimon monastery, which remains under Constantinople, as the rest of Mount Athos, but was built with Russian money. The monks are Russian and Ukrainian, and the rites are performed in Slavonic. As a theologian, I see this situation as most unusual. If monetary support and ethnicity supersedes schism, how real is the schism? It seems that in the case of Russian pilgrims to the St. Panteleimon monastery, episcopal schism did not expand to the faithful. In this tragic dismembering of the Orthodox body, the voice of the faithful prevailed over episcopal quarrels, and so, in one tiny place on a Greek peninsula, the schism is suspended. The community of Mount Athos had a different perspective. The monks actually declare that they remain on the side of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, that they will not allow anyone to instrumentalize, that's a quote, Mount Athos, and that they intend to maintain the unity of their monasteries. They also, and I quote, denounce the Russian interference and the violation of the self-governing status of the St. Panteleimon monastery. A similar refusal to live in schism is discernible in North America. Orthodox faithful who immigrated from Russia and who attend parishes under the Ecumenical Patriarchate continue to commune and participate in all aspects of parish life. The lay aspect of the Orthodox Church remains much more united Eucharistically, while some bishops are unable to express Eucharistically the unity that their faithful experience. I am afraid, as an ecclesiologist and a priest, that this situation adds to an alarming trend, namely an increasing distance between laity and bishops, even to the point where bishops are unable to represent the faithful, contrary to Cyprian's ideal that the church is in the bishop and the bishop is in the church. Allow me to put it boldly, and I wrote this before knowing that it was going to be taped, but I'm going to read it anyway. The faithful cannot keep up with the latest episcopal quarrels, and they continue to commune among themselves, even though their bishops do not. Thus, the action of some bishops becomes less and less relevant and impactful for the life of the church. Hence, their concerted effort to expand the schism from the level of episcopal relations to the faithful. The schism between Moscow and Constantinople elicited mixed reactions among other Orthodox churches. Given my own origins, I will dwell more detail on the response of the Synod of the Romanian Orthodox Church. In February 2019, if I could put it in normal terms, it expressed its desire to remain neutral and to use the situation to expand its own influence. But, of course, this is not how synodal decisions sound, so let me tell you that rather, the Synod recommends the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Patriarchate of Moscow identify through dialogue a solution to their differences by maintaining the unity of faith, by re-establishing Eucharistic communion. If the dialogue fails, a synaxis of all Orthodox primates need to find a solution, as the official version. But, and this is unique to Romanians' response, the Synod can only make a decision at a future meeting after it considers the existence of 127 parishes of Romanian ethnicity in Ukraine, which are under the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate. The Synod desires to obtain guarantees from the secular and religious authorities that the ethnic and linguistic identity of the Romanians in Ukraine will be respected. They should be allowed to organize themselves into a Romanian Orthodox vicariate, similar to Ukrainian vicariate that exists in Romania since 1990. Such a vicariate would guarantee that the Romanian Patriarchate can maintain its spiritual connections with the Romanians living in Ukraine, supporting them with liturgical books and theological education in their maternal language, by which they mean Romanian. Clearly, the Romanian Synod's main concern is the vicariate. If Moscow was previously unwilling to allow on its territory a Romanian vicariate, would the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU, be willing to do so? Would OCU use this opportunity to act as the official who has the authority to create a vicariate? You understand the power struggles there? And in exchange, might later receive the official recognition of the Romanian Synod. But before going further, a word of clarification. Romanian parishes in Ukraine tend to favor the Moscow Patriarchate, regarding it as a more trustworthy guarantee that their freedom to maintain the Romanian cultural identity will be guaranteed. On the contrary, the autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which preceded the OCU, was reticent to allow services in Romanian. But in the spring of 2019, Metropolitan Epifani of OCU indicated that he is inclined to fulfill the conditions of the Romanian Synod. And shortly thereafter, in July 2019, the Synod of the OCU decided to create a Romanian Orthodox Vicariate in Ukraine, subordinated to Metropolitan Epifani. Monasteries and parishes that are majority Romanian are invited to join the vicariate with the guarantee of their choice of Romanian liturgical traditions, language, and calendar. Moreover, the statutes of the vicariate will be elaborated in collaboration with these communities and the Romanian Orthodox Patriarchate. It remains to be seen what the response of these parishes will be and also what influence the Romanian Patriarchate will exercise in Ukraine. If I may interject another ecclesiological remark here, please notice how the Romanian Vicariate is justified on cultural grounds that supersede Orthodox identity. It is assumed that a Ukrainian bishop cannot directly minister to ethnic Romanians. But the Romanian Patriarchate has to have an official presence in the territory of another Orthodox church, or in this case, churches, thus amplifying the disastrous situation of parallel jurisdictions. Providing now a much briefer overview of other Orthodox responses, some churches rejected OCU autocephaly in no uncertain terms. Archbishop Radislav of the Czech lands and Slovakia condemned the ecumenical patriarch for his actions and called Metropolitan Epiphanius an impostor. Poland considers OCU's hierarchs in the rank of the laity without canonical ordination. Rokor suspended concelebration with the bishops under Constantinople, withdrew from all episcopal assemblies, expressed their full support for the actions of Moscow, and condemned the actions of Constantinople as illegal. More difficult to categorize are the following. Antioch is more neutral, even though Patriarch John declared that he fully supports the Patriarchate of Moscow. The Bulgarian Church in May 2019 saw Metropolitan Daniel Nikolov send letters to the metropolitans of the Church of Greece, condemning the ecumenical patriarch as one who destroys the unity of the Orthodox Church, cautioning worldwide Orthodoxy not to choose the path of, and I quote, Eastern Papism. A month later, the Bulgarian Patriarch and Synod declared that Metropolitan Daniel's actions are simply his personal actions. But the situation escalated when Metropolitan Daniel broke Eucharistic communion with another Bulgarian bishop, and thus the Bulgarian faithful are divided in their allegiance to these two metropolitans. The Serbian Orthodox Church has declared that it will not recognize the autocephaly of the OCU. This reaction is motivated both by its close ties with Moscow and by Belgrade's fear that Ukrainian autocephaly will bolster dreams of autocephaly closer to home in Macedonia and Montenegro. But Belgrade needs to maintain warm relationships with Constantinople. The latter refused in 2018 the request for autocephaly of a Macedonian Orthodox jurisdiction that splintered from Belgrade. Moreover, the state of Montenegro is currently registering all religious communities, including an Orthodox body comprising of about 30% of the population that is no longer under Belgrade. In an attempt to garner Constantinople's support, Serbia sent a delegation a month ago to Archbishop Elfidoforos of America to raise its concern about the state's support for an independent Montenegrin Orthodox Church. Just last week, in his meeting with Patriarch Irinei of Serbia, Archbishop Elfidoforos, and I quote, emphasized the permanent support of the Ecumenical Patriarchate regarding the concerning situation in Montenegro. Such encounters might lead one to wonder, is Serbia trying to use the current tension between Moscow and Constantinople in order to further its own interests? Perhaps Romania is not alone in its methods. At parish level, we see Belgrade's same oscillation between Moscow and Constantinople. In 2019, Serbian clergy in North America were not allowed to concelebrate with the supporters of Ukrainian autocephaly, especially clergy under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So in that year, Serbian and Rokor churches in America celebrated Sunday of Orthodoxy separate from the rest. Shortly thereafter, in March 2019, the Serbian Patriarch expressed his personal opinion that it is recommended, but not required, that Serbian hierarchs and clergy abstain from serving with those who have communion with the schismatics, and that was a quote. This year, however, Serbs joined the majority of American jurisdiction for Sunday of Orthodoxy, and this adds to an already complicated situation where some jurisdictions refuse to attend because of liturgical reasons. You will be amazed how priests can find reasons to quarrel, whether we should have the Sunday of Orthodoxy for Vespers, or during the liturgy, or earlier in Orthros. And how can you have this without losing your Orthodox identity? Some for jurisdictional quarrels, too many to explain here. Very interestingly, there was a time when Rokor would not go to OCA, but they would go to Greek churches, even though Greek churches went to the OCA. And that's Eucharistic communion for you in Orthodox Church. Now it is even worse, and the faithful who thirst for intra-Orthodox unity bear the brunt of these episcopal decisions that produce separation. You see how gradually we're answering the question, how does Eucharistic schism expand from episcopal synods to the faithful? Other churches tried a mediating role. Cyprus, by meeting with 7 churches. Albania, Archbishop Anastasios wrote the memorable words, and I quote, "It is unthinkable that the divine Eucharist could be used as a weapon against another church." End quote. In Jerusalem, which organized a fraternal meeting in Amman last month, but only 6 churches attended and they could not issue any major statement. All these attempts remained fruitless, even putting some distance between the Ecumenical Patriarch and these primates, especially Patriarch Theophilus of Jerusalem. Finally, 2 churches recognized OCU's autocephaly. In October 2019, the Church of Greece recognized Ukrainian autocephaly following a synodal decision of all but 7 hierarchs. In fact, 35 metropolitans declared that they had been pressured by the Russian Church to vote against the recognition of autocephaly, but that they had refused. The following month, the Patriarch of Alexandria became a 3rd church to recognize OCU's autocephaly. Given the fact that OCA, Orthodox Church of America's autocephaly, is not recognized by everyone, and yet there is Eucharistic communion in North America, I do hope that at a certain point we will not see the lack of autocephaly as a church dividing issue, but rather we would restore Eucharistic communion. Unfortunately, Moscow's response went in the opposite direction. It broke off Eucharistic communion with the churches of Greece and Alexandria, the latter which actually covers the entire continent of Africa, with one notable exception. Moscow maintains Eucharistic communion with the 7 Greek bishops who opposed OCU's autocephaly and with the faithful in their diocese. In other words, Greek bishops belonging to the same synod and their flocks have different Eucharistic relationships with Moscow. This is an unprecedented situation that not only imposes episcopal schism on grassroots level, but also creates schism within an episcopal synod. The process of expanding schism among the faithful continued with Moscow's refusal to bless pilgrimages to Greece, except in the diocese of the 7 aforementioned bishops. Moreover, Russian Orthodox faithful who reside in the territory of the Patriarchate of Alexandria, again, an entire continent, do not have an alternative to receive communion. Hence, Moscow withdrew the parishes that minister to Russian faithful from under the jurisdiction of Alexandria, and granting them Stavropigial status, subordinating them directly to Moscow. Earlier, in November 2018, Moscow sent Russian priests to Turkey to serve the Russian faithful there, right under the nose of the ecumenical patriarch. Again, the schism is one-sided. Moscow alone stopped communion with the above-mentioned churches, but Constantinople, Greece, and Alexandria are open to Eucharistic communion with Moscow. The Russian Patriarchate did not isolate itself only Eucharistically from some parts of the Orthodox world, but also theologically from the bilateral dialogue with the Roman Catholic Church. So very briefly, I would like to mention that in closing. Pope Francis and the Vatican remained neutral throughout this process. Their position is that OCU's autocephaly is an internal Orthodox matter and that it would be inappropriate for the Catholic Church to intervene. Some Ukrainian Greek Catholics would like the Vatican to speak in favor of autocephaly and thus adopt a colder position towards Moscow. It seems to me that such a gesture would be motivated by other interests than caring for another sister church. Remember Moscow's decisions to pull out of any dialogues in which Constantinople participates. I am a member of the North American Orthodox Catholic Theological Consultation. We are a group of about 20 scholars delegated by our churches, and we are the longest Orthodox Catholic dialogue in the world. Actually, it started during the Second Vatican Council. The better documents were written before I joined. And our dialogue continues unaffected, since it does not include any theologians under the Moscow Patriarchate. The Joint International Commission, however, continues its work without Russian delegates, a situation that unfortunately has precedents. In 2007 at Ravenna, the Moscow delegation walked out in protest over the presence of representatives of the Estonian Apostolic Church, whose canonicity Moscow does not recognize. The Estonian Church was invited by Constantinople, which also recognizes its autonomy. And yet the dialogue went on and issued a statement which Moscow later criticized, in my opinion rightly, since it defines Orthodox identity as being in communion with Constantinople. Certainly not the case today. Moreover, the 2016 Synod of Crete affirmed that the self-determined absence of a national church does not invalidate the dialogue which continues in the International Commission without the Russian presence. Moscow's decisions to withdraw from dialogues complicates a situation that was already very difficult. In my experience, Orthodox delegations disagree internally in matters of diversity or even opposition of Orthodox practices and teachings. So let me state that clearly, oftentimes we disagree amongst ourselves. How can the Orthodox arrive at consensus on the Orthodox position, especially when Moscow is absent? Moreover, such disunity perpetuates the contrast between a centrifugal orthodoxy and a Catholic Church that clearly articulates its beliefs. The schism between Moscow and Constantinople might paradoxically help the cause of Orthodox Catholic unity. This schism started over who has prerogative to declare autocephaly, jurisdiction, and is being augmented by supposed theological differences. Moscow accused Constantinople of an Orthodox version of papism and allowing second marriages for clergy. While the schism was unfolding, I had a heavy feeling of déjà vu. That was how the schism between East and West had started. Quarrel between bishops over episcopal prerogatives, jurisdiction, and the faithful were initially unaware. It took a significant amount of time and effort to take down to the grassroots level of the church the schism, and it was only made successful after the lack of love was masked with theological issues overblown in their importance. And then the families grew further and further apart, so the Orthodox Catholic dialogue had to clarify that our different understandings of baptisms, Eucharist ministry, or the Filioque are not church dividing. What is left dividing us is episcopal prerogatives and lack of love. God forbid that we will need to discuss Orthodox theology in the future ecumenical dialogues, this time between different orthodoxies. Hopefully, the voice of the faithful will demand unity within Orthodoxy, as was the case when Russian faithful insisted to receive the Eucharist on Mount Athos and Moscow allowed it, or when Russian faithful who are members of Greek parishes in the West decided to continue to live faithfully their Orthodox life. I am hopeful that the same trend will continue and that we will see Orthodoxy united again. And who knows, this could also be a Kairos moment, realizing the pettiness of our divisions. Could we experience a new impetus towards Orthodox Catholic unity? Thank you.